time. 1977. All over again.
Doctor, is it? A man of learning. Modesty forbids, but yes.
And welcome to another overview video. In this overview video, I'll be looking at the first season of Big Finish's 4th Doctor Adventures. So, we'll be going back to tea time in 1977. All over again, yes. How exciting. So, we'll be looking at From Destination Nerva to the Aether Adventure. And what is my favourite story from this season? Well, you're just going to have to wait and find out. So get a Doctor Who cup of tea and your favourite Doctor Who mug, and let us begin the adventures of Tom Baker in 1977, all over again. Okay, at number 6 we have Betrayal of the White Worm. Now, this is the weakest because the story doesn't seem to go anywhere. Part 1 is just basically a run around. It's just the Doctor and Leela running around this sort of big estate, being shot at, which, you know, I don't mind a run around story. I think they're alright, but I just find elements of part 1 just a bit tedious. Now, there is obviously the worm plot. Now, this is only when the story explores the worm. The worm is sort of lost in the Aether Adventure, and there's this whole sort of myth that it, you know, dates back to Roman times and all that, and I would have liked to see that developed. Instead of having that sort of being, you know, a run around in part 1, it would have been nice to have actually explored more about the mythos of the worm. But obviously it's in the title, so it should be the main focus, and it sort of is, but it just gets lost within this run around adventure. Now, the thing what makes this or worth it is the cliffhanger. It sort of leads into the Aether Adventure rather well, but the story itself doesn't kick in until part 2, so that's when the Aether Adventure starts to sort of fall into play within this trip. But Tom and Louise, they're great. Tom gets some nice witty dialogue, which is always nice because that is Tom Baker's Doctor in my eyes, just, you know, cracking a joke in the face of death. And there's a nice little moment when Tom and Louise are swallowed by the worm, and they're just talking inside a worm, which is quite a weird thing, and not a thing you sort of expect to say, the 4th Doctor and Leela in a worm talking. But number 6, we have Betrayal of the White Worm, so I'm going to rate this a 5 out of 10. Sort of average story, really. At number 5, we have the Aether Adventure. Now, if you're a big fan of the android invasion, then you're gonna love this story, because it has the return of the Krall, and it just has everything about the android invasion. Now, the Krall themselves, it's nice that we start to understand and know more about the Krall themselves. I mean, I personally love the android invasion. I think it's very much underrated, and it's nice to see them back, and it's great how the 4th Doctor responds to seeing the Krall again, and the people who voice them, Dan Starkey and John Banks, does a fantastic job, and they definitely do sound like the Krall back in 1976. I think that's when the android invasion aired. I may be wrong. So yeah, like I said, this is very much like the android invasion. You know, it has the same android with the, you know, his head finger loaded. You know, those androids in the white sort of space suits, and it has the same sound effects. So it does have this very much 1970s feel because it has the return of units. So it does feel like, well, this story actually, when you think about it, it does feel like it would suit Sarah Jane in a way. When you put all the elements, it does seem like it would slot into, you know, the season 13 sort of area, but they have sort of changed elements to make this more for Leela, which I think there's a nice moment in this story when Leela is riding a horse to save the Doctor from the Krall, and you can see that's obviously made for Leela. You can't see Sarah Jane doing that. So yeah, that's a nice little moment, Leela on a horse saving the Doctor. Now, I suppose I better go on to my negative of this story, and that is the master plotline. It just gets a bit confusing. I'm not going to say what the master's sort of plot is, but it does get a bit confusing, and you do sort of have to pay attention with it. You can't really just wander off and be back and go, what's going on? So yeah, I'm not going to spoil that because that's sort of the main premise of the story, obviously. I've got to say, Geoffrey Beevers, though his plotline is confusing, He does a great job being the crispy master. Tom and Louise. Louise gets some nice moments, like I said, on the horse. So yeah, this is a very good story for the three principal leads in this story. So yeah, I'm going to give this story a 6 out of 10. Number 4, this is probably the most controversial one, and that is The Renaissance Man. Now, a lot of people find this a bit of a confusing story. I can see where they're coming from, because at times it can get a bit confusing. So this story is where you have to pay your full attention to get the gist of the story, so you can't let your mind wander, and or else you'll just be mind blown by it all. So this story begins with the Doctor teaching Leela, which was first referenced in Talons of Weng-Chiang, I believe, where this story, where this season is sort of set in between Talons of Weng-Chiang, because obviously Destination Nerva follows on, and we see the Doctor taking Leela to a museum to begin her teaching, which I think is very interesting. I mean, this season starts to touch upon that, but I think Series 3 is where we start to see the full development of the Doctor's teaching to Leela. We've got this fantastic villain played by Igmanice, who plays Harcourt, and I think that he's a very interesting character with his quest for knowledge, which all reminds me of the third Doctor, but that's the only element what is the same with his quest for knowledge to know everything. And obviously that will be his downfall, as we all know, and that leads to some entertaining moments of the fourth Doctor, which I'll talk about in a minute. So yeah, it's quite an interesting story, and with this sort of time zone shifting and all that, it's sort of like the War Games in that respect, but it's like a theme park for the academics. I don't think theme park's the right word, but I'll just use that as an analogy. It's like a theme park for the academic mind, really. Yeah, so there's a sequence in this sort of reminds me of the Deadly Assassin. The plane won't give it away, but I think that's a very exciting moment in the story. And as like I said, the fourth Doctor is in his element in this, creating these ludicrous facts just to confuse Harcourt. It's brilliant. So yeah, Tom has such enthusiasm in this story, and I love Tom's enthusiasm in this story. So for this story, I think you definitely need to pay attention, because it shifts, all the time. It's never in the same place. There's a lot of stuff going on in it. So I would say you need to concentrate to get the full understanding, because I think that it's quite a clever story, and I think that it gets unnecessary hate. So yeah, you might like this or you might not. So there we are, The Renaissance Man. At number 3 we have Destination Nerva. Nerva. Well, this is obviously the opening, and I think that this story gets a lot of hate. I mean, I've been looking at the reviews on Amazon, and they're saying it's absolutely rubbish. Maybe this because this story had a lot of hype around it, this being the start of the fourth Doctor series. But I personally love it. I think that it's a great story, and I think the music is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think this is the first time we hear the fourth Doctor sort of action theme, which I absolutely adore. So Jamie Robertson did a fantastic job with that. Obviously, we return to Nerva. Now this, I say, is quite iconic to the early Tom Baker years, and it's most iconic for the Ark in Space. And if you love the Ark in Space, you're going to love this, because it's basically the Ark in Space version 2, because it's got the same sort of principle around it, with body horror, people being consumed by the Drell, I think. So it's very much like the Ark in Space in that respect. It starts off rather creepy with the Doctor and Leela exploring this sort of abandoned sort of manor house. I think that's very creepy, and I can easily see this story working in the Philip Hinchcliffe Presents box set, and this being a 4-part, because I think there's so many plot sort of stuff to it that it could flesh out to be a nice 4-parter. Now that said, I think that the ending is a bit rushed and a bit sudden, so that's why I think that this story could work as a 4-part. So yeah, it's just brilliant. It's a fast-paced story, and it's a great little start to the fourth Doctor adventures, and I truly love it. And Tom Baker's got some great lines, I'm back on Nerva. Well, I'm Nerva. So it's got great lines like that, and a fantastic guest cast by Rachel Cassidy, who does a fantastic job playing Dr. Alison Foster, and it's got Tim Traylor playing Lord Jack, where Tim Trailer was spotted for doing the sort of John Pertwee voice, so there we are. What is number 2? Now this was really difficult to decide because I love these two stories because they are just superb stories and definitely worth checking out. And I have chosen for number 2, Wrath of the Iceni. Yes, the noble savage meets the warrior queen. Now, if you're a fan of Leela, you have definitely got to check this story out because it has fantastic character development, because it continues the theme of the Doctor teaching Leela, and I think that this is the best representation of that in the series. And it's very interesting to see Leela turn on the Doctor, saying, "No, Doctor, you're wrong. Boudica is right." And it's interesting to see how the Fourth Doctor reacts to that. With the Doctor sort of being ganged up on by Boudica's men, and Leela, a person he trusts. So it's very interesting to see how the Fourth Doctor copes with that. And it's very much like the Aztecs. Leela, you can't do this. History is a fixed point. You can't change it just because of this. Because of Boudica and that. I think that it's very interesting. It's a good, solid, pure historical story, and it's just interesting to see the Fourth Doctor in that sort of dilemma. Leela, you get to see the full state of her savageness with her fighting the Romans. I think that's brilliant. I think that Tom plays it quite dark and sombre in this story, and I think that it's quite a nice little refreshing note to see Tom like that. Boudica is played fantastically by Ella Kenyon, who I know from the Green Grass, that sort of sitcom many years ago, and she does fantastic, and you can honestly believe her to be this sort of warrior queen. And I think that it's a nice little relationship between Leela and Boudica. Honestly, this is a superb story, and I think that it's a good, solid story, as I keep saying, and it's just definitely worth checking out just to see how Leela turns on the Doctor. So number 1, we have Energy of the Daleks. Now this was my first taste of the Fourth Doctor adventures on audio. Obviously I listened to the Lost Stories first, and this was my first introduction to his own little series, and obviously it got me hooked. I absolutely love this story. I love the opening sequence of the Fourth Doctor and Leela wandering around London, and the TARDIS malfunctioning. It's just, I think this is a great little introduction to the Fourth Doctor adventures. The Daleks themselves are cunning and evil. They're hiding in the shadows while their plan unfolds, and Leela gets to meet the Daleks. I know it plays with continuity, but who cares? I love it. It's great to see how Leela responds to the menacing Pepper Potts. It sees the return of the Robomen, which is a nice little nod to the Peter Cushing sort of films. It's got some it's got a great supporting cast. My favourite is Alex Lowe, who plays Damien, who has a great little relationship with the Fourth Doctor throughout the story, which is great. But my only criticism with this, like most of the season 1 stories, is it could be a 4-parter, and it would be superb. I think that there's so much elements in this, in the plot, that here's a plot element, okay, let's move on. There's not much time to develop some of the ideas, what I think could work, and I think this could be great. And I think that's where the Fourth Doctor reign sort of becomes a bit lackluster, that the stories aren't really made for an hour. They could be easily 4-part stories and work brilliantly. And obviously, this being the first series, they didn't really know how to do it, so this is very much, series 1 is very much trial and error for that. And this story, to me, and this is the reason why I probably love it as well, is that it feels like a Third Doctor story, a Third Doctor sort of political story, like the Green Death mixed with Day of the Daleks. It's great. It's a great little mashup with the Fourth Doctor and Leela in that. So it's superb. I mean, this story gets a bit of hate as well because it's the Fourth Doctor and the Daleks, so obviously it would have a lot of hype around the time. But generally, I think it's a superb story, and I truly love it. So at number 1, Energy of the Daleks. My concluding thoughts on season 1 of the Fourth Doctor adventures. I have to say, this season is the most nostalgic because we've got the Doctor returning to Nerva. We've got it placed in between Talons of Weng-Chiang, which is a fan favourite. We've got the return of the Fourth Doctor and the Daleks, which is exciting to hear Nick Briggs and Tom Baker's voices in your ears, just going, isn't this amazing? We've got the Crispy Master and the Kral. So it's very much like the early Tom Baker stories, with it sort of mimicking and using, you know, plot points from those stories, what we love, and put it on to audio form, like Destination Nerva being very much like the Ark in space, and obviously the last two stories, Betrayal of the White Worm and the Aether Adventure, being very much like the Android Invasion, and is a very good sequel to the Android Invasion. So it's just a superb little nostalgia fest for it. But like I said to some stories, that these stories could be 4 parts and they would work a lot better, because I feel like we have a plot point in there, let's move on, let's go away from that plot point, because it would have been nice to have seen some more development in these stories, but the first season is very much trial and error, and I think that's why they put nostalgia to balance it, because they didn't know what to do. So for, you know what, I'm going to take my mind back to 1977 and let's begin thinking of what I love about that era. So that's what this is, trial and error. But as the 4th Doctor adventures progress, they understand how to write for the hour format and how to write, you know, short and snappy stories for the 4th Doctor. But overall, it's a superb lot of stories. So I would recommend the first season, because it is basically everything you would want from the 4th Doctor, because it is really nostalgic and it definitely takes you back to watching those early Tom Baker stories. A well-deserved cup of tea. Thank you, Tom. I do like a cup of tea. Anyway, I guess that concludes my 4th Doctor Season 1 overview. So thank you very much for watching, and I guess it's tatty bye! Or don't let the Daleks bite. Yeah. Or do they bite? That is the question. Anyway, I forgot my sonic screwdriver. So thank you very much, and yes, cheerio, bye bye.